Chapter 1. I awoke with a start, my forehead and the palms of my hands so clammy and cold I felt as if I'd been lying underground for years. Lord Sycorath's evil cackle lingered in my head like a flickering candle flame, gradually fading. A nightmare. Only a nightmare. I'd fallen asleep during the day as usual, my head resting on the partially rotting log in the middle of the grassy yard in front of Mother's cabin. An all-too-familiar chortle came from somewhere high above me. I didn't even bother to glance up. Mother's and my baby pet dragon, Falzar, undoubtedly flew in circles a dozen or so feet above the yard, also as usual. "Have another lovely dream?" he chirped. I grumbled as I sat up straight and dusted wood chips off the back of my head. "Let me guess, you are having trouble defeating the great Lord Sycorath yet again." I let out a weary sigh as I ran my hand through my hair, hunting for any last chips. "Aha! I knew it!" All right, that's true. Only this time, he defeated me. The dream's eerie images flitted back to me and I shuddered. The battle wasn't supposed to have happened that way, and it definitely wasn't supposed to have ended that way, not in the slightest bit. "Oh, really? Well, that's the first time it's turned out quite like that, now isn't it, young Mara?" I shrugged, dropping my hands into my lap. "I suppose so." There was a light gust of wind as he swooped down and perched his tiny body, about half the size of my head, beside me on the log. He was undoubtedly staring at me with those yellow, unblinking eyes on that scaly, tomato-red face of his, but I continued to gaze straight ahead. Well, don't you think that's just the tiniest little bit troubling, Mara?" "Oh, I don't know about that, Falzar." "Oh, come on now, be honest. You know you always can be with me." He continued to stare at me, and I kept gazing straight ahead. "Mara!" "Oh, all right. I guess maybe it's a tiny, teensy-weensy bit troubling." He gave his wings a sharp little flap. "Well, I should certainly think so, young lady. In fact, I have to say, I'm a tad worried about you." "I don't believe you have the privilege to call me young lady when you are a mere baby dragon yourself." I gave Falzar a knowing smirk. "And why are you worried?" "Well, these nightmares. They must mirror a very real fear you have of not being able to defeat the Dark Lord. You know, when you become of age." Ugh, he was completely accurate. He always seemed to know exactly what I was thinking or feeling. Well, I guessed he should, since he's been Mother's and my pet for 4 whole years now. I still remembered the day she came home with him and shared the horrible story of how she found him. She'd been out on one of her daily hunting trips when she came across his den, which had been empty except for him. Dragons never abandon a newborn, so his parents must have been killed by a pack of filthy, good-for-nothing shadriths. Indeed, Falzar was extremely lucky to be alive himself. "You know what?" I said. "I think you're right. I think deep down a part of me is afraid I won't be able to defeat Lord Sycorath when I'm 18. Like maybe I won't be powerful enough even by then after all." "I knew it. But that's complete and utter nonsense, Mara. I mean, of course you'll be powerful enough." "But how can you know for sure? And how can Mother and how did Father know for sure?" There was a long pause as Falzar grumbled to himself. "Mara, your father was one of the wisest and most powerful wizards in all the history of Alandra. If anybody knew about his own daughter's magical potential and destiny, it was him. And your honest, kind-hearted mother most certainly wouldn't lie about that. So you have absolutely nothing to worry about, okay? Nothing at all." I let those thoughts roll around in my head, then slowly sink into the sludge pool all my gloomy ones eventually gathered in. But what if somehow they're wrong? Both of them, and have been all along. What if my full powers turn out to be a lot weaker than they thought? Or what if I don't know how to use them correctly when I finally get them? I can't train with magic before I finally fight Lord Sycorath, after all. I popped to my feet and drifted over to the edge of the cabin's property, the horrific question swirling around in my head like a black tornado. I gazed out at the thick trees that surrounded the tiny wooden cabin and yard on all sides. The giant gold X's midway up along the first row stared back at me. If I ever wandered past that row, I would leave the tiny magical realm that protected Mother, Falzar, and me from Lord Sycorath and his awful army of shadriths. Father created the realm right before he died, but after 7 days of fighting the Dark Lord, He'd been fatally wounded and too weak to infuse a magical current into the realm. Without one, it was impossible to use magic here, even to train or practice. That was another reason I had to defeat Lord Sycorath at all costs, to avenge Father's death once and for all, not just for him, but for Mother and me as well.
Don't be ridiculous, Mara. Of course your parents have been right all along.
Falzar was flying above me again, the wind his tiny red wings generated wafting against the top of my head and fluttering my hair a bit.
And of course you'll be able to defeat Lord Sycorath. You must calm down and listen to reason. Indeed, what has caused such troubling thoughts to haunt you so much lately?
Well, to be completely honest, I think it has something to do with the fact that I just turned 11, and it just sort of hit me. I still haven't seen the outside world, like not even a single tiny bit of it. I mean, I've never even been beyond the cabin realm, for the great creator of Alondra's sake. Falzar swooped down and perched on one of my shoulders.
Well, yes, that's true, but you know very well why that's the case, young lady.
Yes, I know. Lord Sycorath and his Shadriths made Alondra an extremely dangerous and frightening place, that was for sure. And if I were to have even a speck of a chance of finally ending the Dark Lord's horrific reign, I had to keep out of their way until I was ready to. And, well, all my life I've had to rely solely on Mother and her books to tell me everything about the world. Besides, I feel like I don't really know anyone. Falzar sharply flapped his wings.
Ahem.
Well, aside from you and Mother, of course, but I hardly see Mother. I don't know. I just feel like I should know more people, you know? We were both silent a moment, a refreshing breeze wafting through the yard. I looked back at Falzar. In any case, Alondra is clearly such an incredible, complex place. It just makes me think maybe Mother and perhaps even Father overlooked something important, or simply got something wrong, something that greatly impacts my magical destiny and therefore Sycorath's terrible reign. I mean, it's possible, don't you think? Falzar was silent a moment, then shifted his perch slightly on my shoulder.
I suppose so, Mara, but like you said, your magical destiny is of utmost importance. If they were to overlook or be wrong about something, I most certainly don't think it would have anything to do with that, of all things. Plus, Mother is still well acquainted with Alondra, you know that.
Well, yes, that was all true.
Now, Falzar said, speaking of books, why don't we head on inside now and take a look at them for a little while? Perhaps it'll calm your mind a tad.
That was a great idea, actually. There wasn't much else to do around here anyway. The absolute worst thing about the cabin realm. I took one last look at the thick trees, imagining the tall, gangly Shadriths most likely lurking just beyond them in the mire. The cabin realm existed smack dab in the middle of a gigantic swamp. The terrible creatures, along with Lord Sycorath, didn't even know the realm was here. If you were to walk by this area out in the real world of Alondra, you'd pop right from one end of the realm to the other, totally unaware that you just passed right through it. Father really had to be an incredibly powerful wizard to have created such an amazing thing. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if I had enough magical power at my tender age to destroy at least one Shadrith, or even maybe more. How many could I actually demolish right this very moment? I guess I'd never know. Like Falzar suggested, he and I headed across the yard toward the cabin. As we did, he flew from my shoulder and huffed a small ball of fire into the air a few yards above me, close enough for me to feel a little of its heat on the top of my head. He always did that before he went inside, since he wasn't allowed to do it in there. It was like he had to get it out of his system while he still could, that funny little bugger. Inside, we headed over to Mother's shelf in the main room, and I removed one of the large paper-bound books from it. I laid the book on the floor and sprawled out in front of it, Falzar perching on the back of my shoulder this time. As usual, we gazed down at the pages as I slowly flipped them. Unfortunately, neither of us could read. Mother was always too busy hunting or too exhausted to teach us, but she read them to us all the same. I still enjoyed looking at the writing and sometimes imagining what it said, though. Some of the books were full of tales of Alondra, such as legendary quests by some of the most powerful wizards to ever live, including Father. Others were spell books we couldn't even use, at least not in the cabin realm. Many of the books had colorful illustrations, my favorite parts. Even though Falzar and I had seen them all countless times, I still lingered on the most beautiful ones for at least a few minutes. He never argued. After looking through a few books, I must have dozed again, as I awoke when Mother's tall, thin figure bustled into the cabin. I got my slenderness and black hair from her, but my petiteness and green eyes from Father. Mother was carrying a large gulak skin bag, as usual, which she plopped by the kitchen table. The light metallic scent of raw meat immediately filled the room, making my stomach quiver with hunger. I sighed with relief whenever she returned. Leaving the cabin realm was always potentially dangerous, if not deadly, but Mother had to do it. A part of me always hoped, no, prayed, to the great creator of Alandra that I'd be able to defeat Lord Sikarath before something horrible happened to her. I popped to my feet and wrapped her in an enormous hug. "Hello, Mother. How was your day?"
"Oh, it was fine, my dear sweet Mara." She pulled away. "And hello to you as well, Falzar." "Why, thank you for the fanfare, Mother," Falzar grumbled, hovering in the middle of the room. "Still, it is nevertheless great to see you back safe and sound once again." "Why, thank you, honey." Mother hung her long black cloak, complete with the Emerald Fulgrod family crest on the breast, on the hanger by the door, revealing her thin, white underdress and making her look even skinnier. "How were both your days?"
"Oh, you know," I said, "same as usual. Well, sort of, except for that horrible nightmare."
"I devoured a bird and flew 100 laps around the cabin," Falzar said.
He said it so resolutely, so proudly, I almost laughed. He must have done all that while I was napping.
"Well, that's excellent to hear."
Mother used the large white candle on the table to start a fire in the fireplace. Then she poured water from the gourd into the cauldron hanging above the fire. She must have noticed the somewhat gloomy expression on my face as she said, "You look a little off this evening, Mara. Is something the matter?" She began transferring the raw pieces of gulak meat from the bag into the cauldron. I suppose I should tell her. Actually, yes, there is something the matter, Mother." Falzar sighed as he landed on the kitchen table. Mother stopped transferring the meat and hurried over to me.
"Well, what is it, honey? What's wrong? Please tell Mother."
She clasped both my hands in hers and gazed hard into my eyes. Well, it's just that lately I've been having these really strange dreams."
"Strange dreams? What do you mean, strange dreams? Like nightmares?"
Yes, I suppose you could say so." She tightened her grip on my hands so much they hurt a little.
"Well, what about them, honey? What about these nightmares? Please tell Mother."
"So I did, including the latest one. I suppose I'm worried I somehow actually won't be able to defeat Lord Sikarath when the time comes, or that I won't know how to use my powers correctly when I do. I mean, how can we really know for sure I'll be able to conquer the great Dark Lord like Father said, especially since there's no way to even train with magic in the cabin realm?" A short silence filled the room. Falzar was shaking his head from his perch on the table, looking down at his tiny clawed feet, mumbling so low I couldn't hear him.
"Oh, honey."
Mother crouched and wrapped me in a bone-crushing hug. I hugged back just as hard. When she withdrew, keeping her head level with mine, her eyes misting over,
"Of course you'll be able to defeat the Dark Lord. There isn't a single doubt in all of Alandra. I'm absolutely positive, all right, so please stop worrying about it."
But how can you be so sure?" She let out a light sigh.
"Oh, honey, I must have told you 1,000 times. Your father was one of the greatest, wisest, and most powerful wizards in the history of Alandra. If anybody knew about the magical potential and destiny of his own daughter, he certainly did."
I could barely make out Falzar rolling his eyes out of the corner of my eye.
"Told you,"
he mouthed. But what if he was wrong? My voice cracked on that last word. The idea was just too horrifying. After all, the entire world and all its wonderful magical creatures were relying on me to destroy the Dark Lord and his wretched army of Shadriths. If I failed, he would continue his utterly awful reign, maybe even forever. It was terrible enough everybody still had to wait 7 whole years for me to get my full powers, so I could at least try to defeat him. Who knew what abominable things he was doing to the good, innocent creatures of Alandra right this very moment? Perhaps Mother even knew a bit about that, but didn't want to tell me because of how young I still was and how horrendous it was. The tears started to spill, rolling along my cheeks and wetting my brown cloak's collar. It was just too much. There was far too much pressure on me, and I had far too much doubt. Oh, honey. Mother wrapped me in another enormous hug, squeezing me even tighter this time.
Don't cry. Please don't cry. Everything will be completely fine, you'll see. You have absolutely nothing to worry about. Really, I promise. Cross my heart and hope Lord Sycorath strikes me dead right this very moment.
But full-on sobs rocked my body now, and wouldn't stop. I'd never felt so hopeless and powerless. Mother pulled back suddenly.
Honey, stop. Please stop.
But I couldn't.
Honey, please. You must stop because, well, you see.
She flickered her gaze up at the ceiling, then back at me.
Your father, before he died, he created an extremely powerful weapon.
The sobs kept coming, but I managed to keep my gaze on her now dark, crisp eyes.
And this magical weapon, you're destined to use it, honey. You know, when you become of age.
Really? I somehow got out.
Yes, absolutely. And this magical weapon, it'll make what are sure to be your already incredible magical powers even more incredible and magical. 5 times as much, in fact.
Really? She nodded very hard.
Yes, you see, Mara, the Dark Lord won't even have a chance. Not even the tiniest, flimsiest smidgen of a chance in all of Elandra. And don't worry, the weapon is easy to use. You don't even need to practice any magic to operate it. Your father tested it himself before he, passed on.
Her eyes grew a tad blurry at Father's mention, but quickly cleared up.
So, he, and therefore I, know for an absolute fact that it works, and you'll be able to obliterate the Dark Lord with it. There is no doubt whatsoever.
Really? The sobs finally started to ease up. This was exactly what I needed to hear. Something real, something tangible in a sense, that gave me actual hope I'd be able to pull off such a miraculous feat a few years from now.
That's right, honey. I didn't want to tell you before because, I wanted to wait until you were ready to use the weapon. It's an enormous responsibility, after all, and incredibly hush-hush. Lord Sycorath must never catch wind of this precious device at any cost. You understand, of course, right, honey?
Yes, of course, Mother. As if he possibly could due to the cabin realm and all, but still.
Excellent. So don't cry any more, okay? Like I said, everything will be completely fine, you'll see.
She wiped some of the tears away from her long, spindly fingers and dried them on her underdress.
All right?
Okay. I had to admit I felt immensely better. Thank goodness Father created such an amazing weapon, although I didn't feel completely better. I swept my gaze around the cabin. So where is this magical weapon, Mother? I was pretty sure I'd never seen it before, and this cabin only had 2 rooms and hardly any extra space as far as I knew. She ran her fingers through my hair now, pulling strands away from my tear-stained face.
It doesn't matter, honey. Just know it's here safe and sound and ready for you to use when the time comes, okay?
But I want to know, Mother, and I want to see it. Please, show it to me.
Oh, honey, really, it truly doesn't matter. Pretty please.
It'll help me feel better. I just had to see it. I mean, such a miraculous device had been here in this cabin all 11 years of my life, and I'd never laid my gaze on it. She stopped pulling strands of hair away from my face and looked at me long and hard.
All right, honey.
She got up and opened the cabinet on the far right above the kitchen counter. Ah, of course. I'd never seen inside that particular cabinet before. I guess I always figured it just contained more plates, bowls, and silverware like the other ones. She carefully pulled out a large, long, and skinny object that appeared to be mostly made of metal, hefting it in both hands. A couple parts were wooden, though, including the far end, which was a bit wider than the rest, Just past the larger wooden segment, a small circle of metal jutted from the bottom. I had to admit, the device did look powerful. A shiver, a good one though, rippled along my spine. I'd get to use that amazing thing one day. I, and only I, would finally get to finish off Lord Sycorath with it. See? Here it is. She gave it a quick twirl in her hands, then carefully placed it back inside the cabinet and closed the door. Then she focused a stern gaze on me. But it's best left alone until you're ready to use it, okay? Please tell me you'll stay away from it and the cabinet until you're 18 years of age and ready to defeat Lord Sycorath once and for all. Please promise me, honey. Yes, yes, of course I will, Mother. And thank you for showing it to me. It truly did make me feel so much better. Now there's a good girl. And she went back to preparing dinner. As we ate that evening, she explained how she took down the gulak in the gulak skin bag, as usual. It was always impressive, since gulaks were incredibly fast, silver-furred, deer-like creatures that lived in the thick forests at the base of the gigantic mountain on which Lord Sycorath's castle perched. Plus, that area, which was all the way across Alandra, was always swarming with shadedriths, so it was extremely risky. But Mother was incredibly good at making the trip, and gulaks were so tasty. I never got tired of eating them. After dinner, in the loft above the kitchen, Mother reread one of my favorite tales of Alandra from one of her books to Falzar and me. The story told of how the legendary fairy Gurklon defeated the evil ancient dragon Clarganaw using solely his wits. He couldn't even use his impressive magic because Clarganaw was somehow immune to all magic. Then Mother went to her own bedroom to do her own reading before sleep. She was constantly bringing new books home from the underground market, as no one was allowed to read in Alandra under Lord Sycorath's reign, and if a book happened to have an interesting enough story, she sometimes read it to Falzar and me too, before returning it to the market so someone else could read it next. While she did her own reading, Falzar and I nestled beneath the thin cover on my mattress, which hugged the ground. There wasn't room for anything else in the loft, really. "See?" Falzar said, both of us gazing up at the log ceiling where I could make out all the individual logs neatly nestled together. "I told you everything would be fine. You're sure to grow into your amazing powers when you're 18, and your father created an extremely powerful weapon for when you battle Lord Sycorath. It'll be as easy as gulak pie. You'll see." Yes, I suppose so. Even though I did feel a lot better now, I wasn't about to admit that to Falzar. "Oh, I know so. Now, off to sleep, little Mara." "You too, little Falzar." I didn't have any more nightmares that night, but the next day, a real-life nightmare began.